There are places in America where silence isn't just the absence of sound. It's a presence, a weight that presses against your chest, thick and suffocating, as if the air itself is holding secrets too terrible to speak. The city of Ashford exists in that kind of silence. Nestled deep in the northwestern corner of Montana, surrounded by dense pine forests that seem to swallow the horizon, Ashford is a place most Americans have never heard of. Population 32,000. Remote enough to feel forgotten. Large enough to hide what needs hiding. The first disappearance happened on a Tuesday in October. A college student, 23 years old, last seen leaving the only diner on Main Street around 9 in the evening. Security footage shows a figure walking toward the parking lot, hands shoved deep into jacket pockets against the autumn cold. Then nothing. The car was found 3 days later, parked behind an abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of town. Doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just an empty vehicle sitting in the shadows of a building that hadn't operated in 40 years. Local police called it a voluntary missing person case. Ran away, they said. Happens all the time with young people. But then came the second disappearance. A postal worker, 47 years old, vanished during an afternoon route. The mail truck was discovered idling on a rural road, engine still running. Driver's door hanging open, letters scattered across the gravel shoulder like leaves. Inside the truck, a half-eaten sandwich sat on the dashboard, still fresh. Whatever happened, happened fast. The third disappearance shattered any illusion of coincidence. A mother of two, grocery shopping on a Saturday morning. Witnesses saw her loading bags into her SUV in the supermarket parking lot. Broad daylight. Families everywhere. She closed the trunk, walked around the driver's side, and according to everyone who was there that day, she simply wasn't there anymore. Her groceries sat melting in the vehicle. Her phone was on the front seat, wallet untouched, keys dangling from the ignition. She had evaporated into the mountain air. That's when people started talking. Not to the police, not to reporters, but in whispered conversations behind closed doors, in the dim corners of local bars where the lights are kept low and the jukebox plays just loud enough to drown out secrets. The older residents, the ones who'd lived in Ashford their entire lives, they knew something. You could see it in their eyes. A recognition, a fear that went deeper than concern for missing neighbors. This was something familiar, something that had happened before. The town's history is written in fragments, pieces of a puzzle that no one wants to assemble. Old newspaper archives in the county library reveal a pattern stretching back decades. 1976, 3 disappearances over the course of 2 months. 1988, 5 people vanished in a single summer. 2001, for cases that were never solved, never explained, and eventually never discussed. Each wave of disappearances followed by years of silence, as if Ashford would hold its breath, waiting for whatever darkness lived beneath the surface to retreat back into hibernation. The local historical society refused to comment. The county sheriff's department provided standard statements about ongoing investigations, but offered nothing substantial. When asked directly if there was any connection to the past cases, officials would tighten their jaws and end the conversation. The message was clear. Some questions weren't meant to be asked. But history has a way of leaving evidence, even when people try to bury it. The old Ashford Mining Company operated from 1870 until 1953. Copper mines that tunneled deep into mountains, creating a labyrinth beneath the earth that spans miles. The company employed nearly half the town at its peak, pulling ore from depths that engineers said couldn't be reached, not safely. But desperation makes people reckless, and Ashford was desperate. Records show that accidents were common. Cave-ins, gas leaks, fires that burned underground for weeks. Official death toll from the mining era stands at 63, but the unofficial numbers, the ones whispered about in town, suggest something much higher. Bodies that were never recovered, tunnels that collapsed with entire work crews inside, sealed off and forgotten. The company kept minimal records, paid families to stay quiet, and when the mines finally closed after a catastrophic collapse that killed 16 men in a single day, the entrances were sealed with concrete and steel. But concrete cracks, steel rusts, and the mountain doesn't forget. Local teenagers know about the old mine entrances, the ones that weren't properly sealed, hidden deep in the forest where hikers rarely venture. They talk about dares, about who's brave enough to venture into the darkness with nothing but a flashlight. Most of them won't go anywhere near those tunnels. The few have come back with stories that don't make sense. Sounds that shouldn't exist underground. A humming, they say, low and constant, like machinery that never stopped running. Corridors that seem to shift and change, leading deeper than any mine shaft should go. One teenager posted a video online before the fourth disappearance. Grainy footage shot on a phone, timestamped 3 in the morning. The camera shakes as it moves through a narrow tunnel, water dripping from unseen heights. The beam of light catching on walls that glisten with moisture. Then the light finds something. Markings carved into the stone. Not random scratches, but deliberate symbols, covering every inch of rock face. Spirals and circles, geometric patterns that hurt to look at, as if they're designed to confuse the eye, to make depth and distance impossible to judge. The teenager's voice on the video is barely a whisper. This goes on forever. Every tunnel, every wall, miles of this. The camera pans across the symbols, and for just a moment, something moves in the darkness beyond the light. A shape that could be shadow, could be something else. The video cuts off. That teenager disappeared 2 days later. The fourth victim worked as a librarian. Quiet, methodical, the kind of person who kept detailed records and asked too many questions. She'd been researching the mining company, pulling old documents from storage, making copies of incident reports that most people had forgotten existed. She left the library at closing time on a Wednesday, walking the 3 blocks to her apartment like she did every evening. Neighbors saw her reach her front door, saw her fumble with her keys, saw her step inside. When police entered the apartment the next day after she didn't show up for work, everything was in place. Dinner half prepared on the stove, television still on. Her jacket hung on the hook by the door, but she was gone. The only unusual detail was a window in her bedroom, wide open despite the temperature dropping below freezing that night. And on the floor beneath that window, a trail of damp footprints leading from the opening to the center of the room, where they simply stopped. The footprints were tested. Not mud, not water, something else. Mineral composition consistent with sediment found deep underground, the kind of material that hasn't seen sunlight in millennia. That's when the FBI arrived. 2 agents, neither speaking to press, neither staying at the local hotels. They set up in the sheriff's department, went through every file, every report, interviewed everyone connected to the missing persons. Then, after 72 hours, they left. No press conference. No updates. Just gone, as if they'd never been there at all. When reporters tried to follow up, when families of the missing demanded answers, the response from federal authorities was brief and absolute. No comment. Ongoing investigation. That was 6 weeks ago. The 5th disappearance happened during that silence. A mechanic, working late at the auto shop on the edge of town. The building sits near the tree line, where the forest begins its march up into the mountains. Security camera footage shows a mechanic rolling out from under a car around midnight, standing, stretching. Then the camera glitches. Static for exactly 11 seconds. When the image returns, the shop is empty. The car still on the lift, tools scattered on the floor, the bay door hanging open tonight, and in the gravel parking lot, leading away from the shop toward the woods, another set of those footprints. Damp, mineral-rich, and possibly old. They continue for 30 feet before vanishing completely, as if whoever or whatever made them simply lifted into the air. Ashford is dying now, not from the disappearances themselves, but from the silence that surrounds them. Businesses are closing. For sale signs populate front yards. People who lived here their entire lives are packing up and leaving without explanation, driving away from a place that suddenly feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to emerge. The ones who remain don't talk about it. They've learned that lesson generations ago. Silence is survival. Questions lead to answers, and the answers that live beneath Ashford aren't meant for human understanding. The old-timers, the ones in their 80s and 90s who remember when the mines were still operating, they carry a particular kind of dread. Ask them about the collapse of 53, the one that killed 16 men and shut down the company forever, and they'll tell you it was an accident. They'll tell you the miners found something down there in those deepest tunnels. Something they'd been waiting in the dark long before the first pickaxe struck stone. They broke through into chambers that shouldn't exist. Space is too vast and too perfectly formed to be natural. And in those chambers, carved into walls that predated human civilization by millennia, were the same symbols that now mark every tunnel beneath the mountain. The company tried to seal it all, collapsed the main shafts, filled others with concrete, destroyed the maps and records. But you can't seal away something that's already awake. The old-timers say the humming started after the closure, that low constant vibration that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. They say the first wave of disappearances in '76 was when the thing that lives beneath finally found its way back to the surface. And every few years, when it needs to feed, when it needs to expand its territory, it reaches up through those unsealed tunnels and takes what it requires. The police know, the mayor knows, the families of the mining company executives who still live in the large houses on Mountain View Drive. They definitely know. It's an open secret, the kind that gets passed down from parent to child in hushed bedtime warnings. Don't go into the woods alone. Don't explore the old mine sites. And if you hear that humming, that deep resonant sound like the mountain itself is breathing, you run. You don't ask questions. You don't investigate. You run. But running only works if you're already outside. The sixth disappearance happened 3 days ago. A high school teacher, grading papers in the basement of the school library. The janitor found the desk empty at 7 in the morning, papers scattered, coffee still warm, and coming from somewhere beneath the building, from utility tunnels and maintenance corridors that connect the school to the old downtown infrastructure. That sound, that impossible, ancient humming. They locked down the school, evacuated the building, brought in engineers to inspect the basement, the foundations, the underground systems. What they found made them seal the building permanently. The utility tunnel connected to an old service corridor from the mining era, one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, wasn't on any modern map. And that corridor, when they followed it with cameras and remote sensors, led down, not horizontally, but down, spiraling into depths that made no geological sense, walls covered in those symbols, that humming growing louder with every foot of descent. The camera feed cut off at 3,000 feet. The last image it transmitted showed the corridor opening into something vast, something that breathed. Ashford is a wound in the map of America, a place where the earth remembers things humanity has chosen to forget. The disappearances will continue.